I've always thought that the chant to start the Dharma talk is a little daunting with an unsurpassed, penetrating, perfect Dharma. Maybe a little bit too much to ask. But so good morning. As has been mentioned by many people before, Buddhism is a practice with a lot of lists, and I've always thought that was odd because sort of the foundational principles of Buddhism are the ideas of non-self and emptiness, or the concepts that everything is interconnected without a permanent self, that we're neither separate now, nor will our concept of unchanging self last forever, or even until the next moment. And lists, on the other hand, by their very nature, divide things into separate categories and seem to give them a self, or codify them into something permanent. And oddly, when you start looking into the lists in Buddhism, you realize that they often seem to circle back and hit another topic on another list. And that makes me wonder why they weren't on that list in the first place. And so that's, we've been studying the paramitas, and that's another list. And most sources mention that they aren't separate and that they're empty and infinitely interrelated. Usually they do it after they've separated them into six separate categories and covered them each separately. And I'd like to ruminate on the fact that they're all interconnected today, rather than just one specific paramita. And I'll use examples that work for me, but perhaps over the next few days, as you're going through and looking at the paramitas in your practice, contemplate how they interconnect for you. I also wanted to reiterate something that Kanho Chris said in her talk a couple of weeks ago. I have a real problem with the translation of the word paramita to perfection, because I think that makes it really hard. And in a couple of the sources that I have on this, both in The Heart of the Buddha's Teaching, which is a book by Thich Nhat Hanh, he points out that the Chinese character for paramita actually means crossing to the other shore, which is a famous Buddhist metaphor for attaining enlightenment or nirvana. And Norman Fisher, in his book The World Could Be Otherwise, breaks it down as param, meaning the other side, and ita, meaning gone. So gone to the other side. And I like this concept better because it redefines paramita practice as a process rather than a goal of being perfect. And it's the process of crossing from the shore of suffering, anger, and depression to the shore of peace, non-fear, and liberation. So I find it's interesting how frequently translation is something we run into in a practice that has gone through so many different countries to get to where we are. Um, I sometimes think of the way that I respond to the paramitas as sort of like those pop-up psychological quizzes you get on Instagram, where you take a quiz and they give you a bar graph or a pie chart that tells you what your personality type is supposed to be. Um, and uh, and I sort of, when we do separate them, I have a different level of acceptance and difficulty for each of the paramitas. And just using Dana Paramita as the first example, I have a real problem with this one because I'm a miser. My parents were part of the silent generation, which is the generation that came before the greatest generation. And their formative years were during the Great Depression of the 1930s. And that experience literally informed their behavior for their entire life. And consequently, that imprinted on mine. When we when my father passed and we moved my mother from the house where I grew up into a smaller condominium, we were, helping her pack up her stuff, and in a drawer in the kitchen there was every single rubber band. Yeah, every single rubber band that had come on every issue of the Seattle Post-Intelligencer newspaper for 30 years. And my mother was just incapable of throwing anything away that might be useful later that she would have to buy. Um, and I should note that this happened well before she started to suffer from dementia, so this wasn't some weird thing that happened as her brain was going. Um, and I have to remind myself to be generous. And in order to do so, I actually set a budget every year for charitable giving. And that's not to limit me, it's to make me give that much. I have to reach the budget, um, because otherwise I absolutely wouldn't do it. And that is, in its nature, is sila paramita. Okay, that is the precepts. I make a rule that I must follow the precept that the disciple of Buddha is generous, and it makes it easier for me to live dana paramita. I still have to remind myself to tip more. There's no way on this green earth that my parents would tip for counter service. Um, and it's a daily thing that I have to remind myself. But using the being upright and following the precepts paramita helps me to be more generous, maybe in a rigid way, but it works. Now, Talis last week pointed out that dana paramita isn't just a money thing. It also is a generosity of heart, and in the way that we see and interpret the actions of other people. But I find that if you are uptight with your money, you're frequently very uptight with your interpretations of other people's intentions. They sort of go together. I mean, the thought that I can't give money to that homeless guy because he's only going to use it for drugs and alcohol. Okay. I'm being neither generous with my money or with my interpretations of that man's intentions. So the two go hand in hand. Now that I'm on Sila Paramita, there's another problem. One of my lifelong partners has been OCD, and I keep lists of everything. I have a daily checklist on my phone that I try to finish every day, with little check boxes that when you touch it, it makes a check mark. And if I and one of those boxes is a box that's labeled sit. So I mean, I wouldn't meditate daily if it didn't mean checking the box off my list. So for me, Sila Paramita plays into my natural rule-bound personality disorder, and doing so leads to competition with others and judgmental behavior about others not living up to the rules as well as I do, or as well as I think that they should. And in this one, I need to blend in a little Kshanti Paramita to be patient with others and to be patient with and to be persistent in my own efforts to be tolerant. And I also need Prajna Paramita to have the wisdom to know how and when to apply the rules that I apply to myself. And I need the Prajna to realize that Sila Paramita is really about how I affect others. And understanding that the boundaries aren't as distinct as they appear to be. And Thich Nhat Hanh wrote that the practice of the precepts is a form of love and a form of giving, and it assures the good health and protection of our family and society. So, in looking at it that way, following the precepts is giving your family and giving society in general the stability and care that it needs. Now, when we get to Kshanti, Tim knows that's the name of my sailboat, and this is where I've sort of found my groove. This isn't the tallest bar on that personality graph I was talking about. I mean, I'm not the most patient person by any means, but I have managed to develop patience and tolerance after years of impatience, high demands, intolerance, and anger. And I like working on it. I like working on patience, tolerance, and persistence. And I think I've found having found tolerance for my own shortcomings, I can better see my way through giving others the grace for being as screwed up as I am. And so how did I get here? was becoming more tolerant, just becoming lazier with age. And if the political opinions of my aging friends and relatives are any indication, age doesn't lead to tolerance. So, so I'd have to say that I think this, if I think about it, this likely comes down to jhana paramita or meditation practice and vira paramita. And I've actually made a joyful effort that Norman Fisher talks about in The World Could Be Otherwise to practice patience because I like practicing patience. And the practice of meditation has allowed that to sort of fertilize and irrigate and take hold. Um, and just going through them, when I get to Virya Paramita, I mean, joyful energy is sometimes in short supply. There are times where I really don't want to be a good Zen Buddhist. I am, by nature, prone to anger and occasionally laziness. And sometimes I just don't want to sit. And sometimes I just rather scream at my television. At that point, I have to go back and revisit patience, and both with my own frailties and with the failings of other people that make me want to scream at the television. And I have to go back to ethical conduct to remind myself to cherish and polish the three treasures, and to remind myself that a disciple of Buddha does not indulge in anger. Um, so again, they start to blend. And when we get to meditation, jhana paramita, as Talis was talking about last week, this can be a technical exercise, the way he was talking about, in correct sitting posture and concentration, and how you sit on your cushion. And we just did Fukazen Zagi this morning about uh, uh, Dogen's suggestions for how you're supposed to meditate, and it's pretty technical. Sit with with your nose in line with your navel and your tongue on the front roof of your mouth. Keep your eyes open. Um, that you can look at jhana paramita as that, but for me, this one really comes down to trying to the other thing that Dogen talks about, which is meditation. Zazen isn't just on the cushion; it's everything, and it comes to trying to live mindfully all the time, not during zazen only. And I do love to sail, and one of the reasons I love to do that is that when there's a good wind, I have to devote myself utterly to the action of sailing. I have to feel the wind, trim the sails, watch for other boats, floating debris, rocks, hopefully getting to spot some eagles, porpoises, and whales along the way. And when I'm sailing in a brisk wind, I'm not doing sailing. I am sailing. And, excuse me, this applies as well to long bike rides. I have the same thing happen to me. And oddly enough, folding the laundry for some reason. Um, and I'm trying to extend this into driving, shopping for food, and every other activity. Not always successfully. And doing this requires the joyful energy, virya paramita, and patience. To be patient with the many, many times, rather than being the activity, I'd just rather get it over with. And to develop the generosity to believe that the idiot who just cut me off in traffic or can't seem to get their shopping cart out of the center of the aisle in Costco, or who just hit my boat with a giant wake as they passed, didn't do it on purpose. Because we all know, as George Carlin loved to point out, that if you drive faster than me, you're a maniac, and if you drive slower than me, you're an idiot. And that may be the first time George Carlin has ever been referenced in a Dharma talk. Um, uh, Now, you get to Prajna Paramita, of course, and that's the ultimate uniter. And it's necessary for all the others, both in terms of the wisdom of how to apply them, greater wisdom that all things are one and connected as well. So it's sort of two things: is how do you do this, and the fact that the whole exercise is to show how everything is empty of self. And in the words of Thich Nhat Hanh, again, this comes from his book, the Heart of the Buddhist Teaching, is perfect understanding is present in all the other perfections. perfect understanding is like a container. If the container is not baked well in the kiln, there will be cracks and the liquid in it will flow out. Without right understanding, none of the other paramitas can go very far. So that's, for me, when I was sitting down and thinking about how these are all interrelated, that's what with my own psychopathology and my own weirdnesses in my own life. But it's an interesting exercise to go through to try to look at it, how it affects you. The next thing is to look at it from a slightly different angle, and that is that they aren't just interconnected. Okay, they're not interconnected because they just support one another. They're actually the same thing. Okay, and what the 6 paramitas are describing is actually different ways of looking at the same thing and one way of crossing over to the other shore. And in this view, dana isn't generosity. It's the ethical thing to do. It with patience and vigor and complete presence of mind and the wisdom to see that you and the recipient of your generosity actually inter-are, to use another word from Thich Nhat Hanh. And sila, the practice of ethical conduct, is the practice of generosity. And treating others ethically, giving them the knowledge that you will treat them with respect and care. The process involves patience for both yourself, them, and the process of giving. And it's done with joyful effort and a careful embodiment of the actions. So, and with wisdom that your actions affect others as well as yourself, because we're all in this together. So you can go through the exercise. I won't do it for all 6 this time, but you can go through the exercise and realize that each of them is each of the rest of them. And the list, as many Buddhist lists do, collapses into itself when you look at it hard enough. And just to bring this to sum it up, a final quote from Thich Nhat Hanh is that the heart of in his book, The Heart of the Buddhist Teaching, he writes that these are the practices of the 6 paramitas offered by the Buddha. Each of the 6 contains the other 5. Understanding is giving, meditation is giving, continued practice is giving, and mindfulness training is giving. If you practice giving deeply, you are also practicing understanding, meditation, and so on. In the same light, we see that giving is mindfulness training, understanding is mindfulness training, and inclusiveness, which is how he translates patience, is mindfulness training. If you practice one paramita deeply, you practice all 6. When there is understanding and insight, meditation will be true meditation, continued practice will be true continued practice, inclusiveness will be true inclusiveness, mindfulness training will be true mindfulness training, and giving will be true giving. Understanding increases the quality of the other 5 practices. So when we were given the assignment of looking at a paramita that resonates, if I had to do that, I would pick Kshanti paramita. But I think the interesting thing is that by picking one, you pick them all. So go off and chew on that for a while. I was going to divide us up into small groups, but we are a small group. So what I'm going to suggest is that we just have a group discussion, but I'm interested in, for each of us, if you had to pick, if you did the Instagram version of the paramitas, which wedge on the pie graph would be the big one for you? And then how would that, if you look at that, how is that actually the rest of them? And just give everybody a few minutes to think that over, and then we'll share. They knew, they heard the whole thing. So, and now she's actually giving me a test to see if I remember. So giving, dana paramita. Sila paramita is following the precepts, so being ethical. Kshanti paramita is patience. Um, then we have virya paramita, which is effort, joyful effort, or vigor. A lot of the words kind of sort of end up sounding like vigor and virya, virility, right? Um, then we have, which one am I forgetting? Oh, we no, prajna. I'm only up to five. Oh, yeah, jhana paramita. Jhana is Zen meditation. Okay, and then we have, yeah, that's mindfulness training is jhana. Yeah, and then and which literally is Zen as it gets translated through the ages, and then there's prajna, which is wisdom. Uh, that's the last of the one that sort of unites everything. Okay, so can I or so I'm going to give us everybody about 5 minutes to sort of sit with that, and then we'll come back and chat. So here we go.